Welcome to the Standard of Truth podcast. In this podcast, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott and Professor Richard Leduc explore the early history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the life and teachings of Prophet Joseph Smith. They examine the original historical sources and provide context for events of the past. They approach the history of the Church with faith, expertise, and humor.
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Standard of Truth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Garrett Dirkmott, and I'm joined by my friend, Gangris Hoof and all, Professor Richard Leduc.
Hello, Genrif. It's nice to be with you today. We've received several emails that have asked for kind of a multi-parter. We're so close to the apostates or apostles, apostates,
we
and
did
apothecaries.
do a second part of that.
1.5. Yeah,
we do need to finish that today.
Yes, we do.
Need to talk. We told them the exciting conclusion.
Oh, that's right.
About George Adams.
George Adams. Everyone was on just the edge of their seat. It's like at a monster truck rally. You pay for the whole seat, but you only need the edge.
You only need the edge. I mean, of the thousands of emails we received today alone, how many of them were about the conclusion of the George Adams episode?
We received 0 emails of anyone showing the slightest interest of that conclusion. But I assume it's because they knew that we'd follow through. They wouldn't need to email.
Right, they're waiting.
We always follow through on everything that we say that we're going to get to.
I don't remember that, but yes.
So we're going to get to that. That's very exciting.
Okay. Yeah.
We have a couple of emails from our Phoebe Draper mailbag. Dear Professor Leduc, sorry for this for spelling it wrong.
Is it spelled wrong?
You know what, JT, it's a little wrong, but you got the L right, you got the D right, and
there's only 3 other letters.
You got a U in there, and you know what? I've had it spelled much worse. So
when you go to the temple,
when I go to the temple, by my wife, everyone. Please tell Dr. Dirkmott to stop lying.
Whoa. This is we get a lot of these emails, but usually they're from antagonists.
So this one is one of my favorites. So tell Dr. Dirkmott to stop lying about what people think about the podcast. You have a very addicted 13-year-old listener in Riverton, Utah. Professor Leduc, I hope you know you have at least one listener that loves and plays football. That's great,
nice.
JT.
So is he betting on football? Is
No.
what comes next?
Well, first of all, I'd like to refer everyone to President Hinckley's 2005 conference address from April on no should gambling ever. Yeah. Every time you talk about it, my ears perk up, and I love how you sound so knowledgeable. Oh my gosh, JT. Oh my gosh.
JT knows the way to your heart.
He sure does. I don't care if he's...
It's like a reverse Janet.
No, that's funny. No question yet. Hope you will read this on air so my mom, who introduced me, can hear that I wrote an email and she didn't.
Wow.
By the way, I'm begging my parents to let me use their card to sign up for premium.
So
thanks for all you do. I can't say it enough. Sincerely, JT.
JT.
Oh my gosh.
So first of all, thank you for listening to us and suffering through the interminable George Adamses, all of the other apostates, apostles, and apothecaries.
I have children the age of JT who don't listen and don't like me personally, let alone the podcast.
Well, because you've been wrong on so many sports picks.
I'll tell you what. I've got a good feeling about BYU
over Arkansas.
Over that happened last week.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking.
No, Kansas this week. It's the first Big 12 game.
But Kansas is favored by almost 10 points.
They are. It's 9. I've heard it's 9.5 from a degenerate friend of mine. That's ticked up. I think it started around 7.5 or 8. But I've got a good feeling. BYU looked exciting against Arkansas. It's our official Big 12 conference kickoff game in Lawrence. Kansas is notoriously terrible, although this year they've got a pretty good.
They were good last year too.
They have a pretty good. Yeah. They have a pretty good team. Well, I mean, they started off like 6-0 and then like barely made a bowl game, but
just like us.
But anyway, JT, this is the nicest and sweetest email. And so I'm going to send you the links to all of the premium content.
All of them?
All of the links.
How
all
are
of the
we going to
content.
get his parents' credit card information?
Well, I'm just concerned
and
that he
the
might.
PIN number.
The security code on the back.
Yeah,
Make sure
we need you
get
to
that,
tell us
JT.
we need to know the dates, the security code.
Just take a picture of the front and back. Send
Do
it
you have
over.
the mailing zip code? That's very important.
JT, I'm going to send you the links to all of the premium content. That is absolutely so nice. If you moderately like this, then that will be fine. And that's the Standard of Truth premium guarantee. It's fine.
okay.
It's fine.
Yeah,
It's okay.
it's not the worst thing you've ever listened to.
Anyway, very, very, very kind. Thank you so much. And I will send that, and I will actually send it out. Garrett's going to start talking here in a little bit about like America and the First Amendment and things, and I'll drone off. And
Right. That way, when I ask him a question, his glazed over eyes will look up and look at me like I'm the one not talking.
I didn't even get the expression right. As Garrett drones on, I drift off. That's what I meant to say, but I combined them. I will drone off.
You'll drone off while I drift on.
Yeah,
you know what? I do drift on.
So thank you, JT. This second email comes to us from Janet. It's a follow-up to the
Janet.
email, who is
Become
quickly
fast friends with Richard.
Yeah. First of all, absolutely love Janet. She's one of our favorite listeners,
And she's hilarious.
She's very funny.
She's got to do, improv on the weekends.
Well, so the subject line is hyena, ? Gangrenous hoofed antelope, ? But seriously, folks, Garrett did a fine job of bringing forth the truth, as always. Thank you, Garrett. We do all appreciate your research, Richard, in finding the latest and greatest clarification, top drawer there. And a big congratulations, Richard, on defending your Chapter 1, huge step forward. I believe she's talking about my dissertation. And I might have taken liberties when I said Chapter 1. I mean mostly the
You mean your introduction?
no, mostly the table of contents.
Okay, so you have an idea about what you might defend on.
I do have an idea. It was labeled as cute, or part of it was. Huge step forward, really, really, really. And isn't it so true that there is always someone with a very small attitude on a committee, and on your committee, someone with a questionable vocabulary and small enough, like an ant, to brazenly reduce all your hard work down to cute. I appreciate, by the way, her saying all of my hard work. She obviously doesn't know the caliber of the work that I have produced. Such buffoonery. The best suggestion I can give comes from my 3-year-old grandson upon encountering an ant he didn't like, whereupon he informed the small ant, "Look out, ant, or I'm going to squash you with my great big foot." Makes me think of those Ant-Man shows. I kind of like them. Digress. By the way, I used to work at the College of Education at the University of Utah. Just so you know, if you ever need to just pop in at the Titanic Business School or the Lusitania Professional Business School.
Did she name those for ships that sunk tragically for a reason?
I'm not sure. But she does give some good advice here if you're looking for reasonable parking at the University of Utah. It is increasingly difficult to find parking there. You can pay, or you can park in the circle at the COE, as long as there's it's no longer than 20 minutes. The reason for this is that the Tanner dance parents are always coming and going there. Park and go into the building for a bit. It's not patrolled as much as other areas because of this. I can't guarantee not getting a ticket, but the chances are quite a bit less. Just make it quick. Which, by the way, that is great advice. I usually park over at the Utah Museum of Fine Arts that's over by the business school. I walk in, take a look at the Acme Lab hot dog bridge. You rub. It's an exhibit. It goes away in October. You should go see it.
You know what?
Lovely.
I like how we're doing free advertising for your school.
It's a free museum.
Nope, you're trying.
No, I go look at the hot dog bridge. I rub my chin in kind of a contemplative way. Then I register my license plate at the welcome desk. Look, I was talking to Garrett about this before. We both grew up in relatively rural Idaho, where paying for parking is something. I have a moral aversion to it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, what do you mean pay for parking?
Yeah. Is there, is a Joe Diffie concert going on here? Why would we have to pay for parking? Well, we're not going to get George Strait there.
Joe Diffie coming in. People are parking cars in their front yard. They're going to make their mortgage right. Joe Diffie. I remember I was in New York City once with some friends, and we were looking for a place to park, and we couldn't find any place. And I found a garage, and it was $44 per half hour. And I said, fine. I just wanted to get out of the car because the traffic was so bad. But anyway, that's good advice. She says, love you guys, bunches and bunches, signing off, the hyena, although she would prefer jackal, which is very good. Anyway, Janet, you have a great sense of humor. You are absolutely lovely. And you took the episode in the manner that it was intended.
Well, yes. And we had someone else even comment on that, on maybe not that episode, but a previous one where we were talking about authorities. Larry emailed just to check base to see whether or not when we were talking about how, the first presidency was, we've actually had a couple of emails on the first presidency. Maybe we need to do a whole episode on that, but that at some point we were talking about how the first presidency is a very different thing today than it was in Joseph Smith's time, in part because in our modern history, right? So in the last 30 years, people like JT, you remember,
right,
all 13 of those. We haven't had members of the first presidency who weren't apostles. So Larry wrote in and said, well, there were some members and especially assistants to the first presidency who weren't apostles in the earlier part of the 20th century, which is true. But really, since President Hinckley, which is where most people's, our younger listeners' understanding of church experiences, today it would be a pretty big thing. I mean, I know that we have people who remember times when there were, as we were talking with Janet, assistants to the 12. If that were to happen again today, my guess is it would be a really big deal.
For sure. Because
it's been, 4 decades since it happened. And so whenever you go that long without doing something, it suddenly becomes a big deal. A great example of this would be, what if the church were to fill the office of presiding patriarch again? The church had a presiding patriarch for a long time. I mean, all the way back to Joseph Smith's time. You had Father Smith, and then you had Hiram Smith, and then you had William Smith, and on down the line. In the Smith family, you had a presiding patriarch who was in charge of all patriarchs in the church, and setting apart new patriarchs and handling all that. You had a presiding patriarch, and it was an office that's mentioned in Doctrine and Covenants section 124. So it's not like just an office that we made it up one day. We're like, I don't know, what are we going to call the person who hands out the hymnals? I don't know, presiding patriarch. That sounds good. Well, I'd love to be the presiding patriarch. Here's your hymnal. But after the most recent patriarch stepped down for age reasons, because he was well over 100 years old, the church didn't fill that position again. Now, they didn't release a press statement saying, hey, there's now no longer an office of presiding patriarch. It essentially is an unfilled position. I would assume much like most of the primary callings in most of your wards, where, there is a place for a permanent CTR teacher. There's just not a CTR teacher, right?
I don't know. My wife teaches in the nursery. She loves it more than anything.
Really?
It's pretty great. Going from the 2 hour or from the 3 hours to the 2 hours does help out quite a bit.
Yeah, because of the old adage, anyone can tolerate anything for an hour.
That's about right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our marriage is based on that.
Well, I was going to say, except for those of you listening to this podcast, you may feel like as we approach the hour mark, you know what? I'm not okay with it as much as I thought I was. Anyway, the point being with the office of presiding patriarch is it has now been so long since we had one that many people listening to me will remember when we had one, But there's a considerable portion of people listen. I love how I'm talking about this like there are literally millions of people listening.
Well,
But
look, if JT has his way,
JT, you've got to get more people to listen, or our friend R in Idaho needs to arrest more people. I feel like he is not doing enough to arrest enough people to get our podcast on the map. But the point being, if tomorrow President Nelson were to call as a special assistant to the First Presidency or as another First Presidency member, a member of the 70 or someone who wasn't even a 70 to that position, it would be a shocking thing. It wouldn't be, I'm not saying it would be a bad thing. It's not like people would be like, oh no, I no longer have a testimony. You know what? Actually, there would at least be someone who would say that, right? Because Twitter exists. So,
for sure.
So someone somewhere would be like, oh, this proves that President Nelson isn't a prophet because he did the exact same thing that dozen prophets before him did. So therefore, yeah, I mean, like there's always someone who will say something like that. But I think in our collective memory of the most modern era of the church, it would be a very, very odd thing. And, someday when we go through church administration, we could go through and kind of categorize each presidency and each apostleship. Would that be fun?
Well, it would
be
kill
something.
time.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like Richard, he just gave me a hard pass. Appreciate the hustle.
No.
bro.
Let's turn that into a 7-parter. See what we can do.
And the last week of the broadcasting of the Standard Truth podcast was this week. So now we promised when we left you last that we would finish the exciting conclusion of George Adams.
Yes.
We talked about how George Adams was claiming that he was the 13th apostle. And then we read his brother Elias. I don't know. How would you characterize Elias's letter to George?
It was one where he pointed out that he believed that James Strang might not necessarily have quite the authority, according to 37 sources that he cited, that his brother thought that he did.
Yeah, and I feel like he was he went the opposite of the only the elder route. Yeah, he said, so you're trying to tell me that James Strang is the leader of the church when he's only an elder and everyone else has keys. But what happened to George Adams after that? That's the question. Well, so Adams is, and you'll see why this is the exciting conclusion. I know you're like, this better be so good. I waited all week on pins and needles. I mean, look, how many of you out there, email us, are sitting there saying, you know what, I can't wait the week. I need to talk to them now. I don't need it enough that I'm going to sign up for premium because I can't get my parents' credit card. But I am, that's another reason to sign up for our Palmyra tour. Our Palmyra tour, we still have spots left on that.
Yeah, Nauvoo is sold out.
Yep. But the Palmyra tour, where we are going to be going to Fort McHenry, where the Star Spangled Banner was, and to Gettysburg. So if you like some American history stuff, I'm a little bit nerdy at those places. Just going to let people know that right now.
As opposed to normally.
As opposed to the fact that we will talk, we won't talk about the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. We will. We
did on the last one.
We actually did.
We were in Vermont and we talked about it.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to go through a 12-step program. I think I'm still in, I still haven't accepted that there's a higher power. That's the big problem.
That's the first step.
I know that I'm still not there yet. So, at any rate, please, if you're interested, we'd love to have you come on the tour. But the George Adams saga is a crazy one. It's actually one that I knew about before I got into church history. And now you got to be thinking, how could you possibly, I don't even know who George Adams is. And I'm pretty sure a gangrenous hoofed antelope wouldn't know either. Right. Well, because before I came to the church history department, when I was working on the Joseph Smith papers, while I was getting my PhD, back when my advisors were telling me how stupid I was, and actually I had one member of my committee who informed me after he was named officially on my committee, Garrett, you should know my wife hates Mormons. hates them. And he like said it with a sigh like that. And I'm like, what actually do you say to a member of your dissertation committee when they tell you my wife hates people like you?
Well, so there's lots of reasons to hate you personally, right?
Right, which I would have been okay with.
Well, yeah, but so get to know me and hate me for who I am.
I want you to hate me for the content of my character.
If we learn nothing from Martin Luther King.
I need you to hate me because I'm hateable. Not because my wife's also a Mormon.
And she's lovely.
She's the night, like, if any of you know Angie, right now you are shaking your heads, nodding with me, listening to me right now saying, Angie is much better than you. Angie she's the greatest. Honestly, she's like the greatest person ever. If an angel fell from heaven, that's why her name's Angie. You know, I mean,
preaching another gospel.
No, that's a different one. Anyway, so while I was being told that I was hated because I was a Mormon, I was the assistant editor of the academic journal Diplomatic History at the University of Colorado. It's published out. It's a top tier. It's a tier 1 journal for diplomatic American foreign relations, right? So, and because of my affiliation with that, I one time going over something else came across an article talking about George Adams. Well, why? Why would anyone at the University of Colorado care about any Mormon at all, let alone an apostate one who had gone away long before they went to Salt Lake? Because George Adams is still, he's still got some Mormonism on the brain. And he moves back east. He lives in a couple places, but he goes back to eventually ends up in Maine. And he founds a church. He calls this church the Church of the Messiah. And it becomes a highly millennial church. And one of the points of the second coming, being very, very, very near, is George Adams begins to teach that in order to usher in the second coming, or at the very least, in order to be there when the second coming occurs, guess where these people need to go? Any ideas, Richard? Where would they need to go?
Boy, of all the places, I'm going to say East Lansing, Michigan.
Wow. That's where you go when you want to lose to the Wolverines. But
that's Michigan State. The Spartans are there.
I know.
Lose to the Wolverines.
Lose to the Wolverines.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
The Wolverines.
Yeah.
They're coming in Ann Arbor. They're beating the
Yes.
Spartans. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I misunderstood. I apologize.
JT, this is the reason why we can't talk about sports, because I will say something like Michigan's going to beat Michigan State, and Richard hears put all your money on Michigan State. That's what he heard.
Well, look, they're going through a huge issue with a coach. Washington beat them very badly last week.
Washington also beat Boise State very badly.
I don't want to talk about that. Boise State handled North Dakota barely. You're going to want to fade Michigan State.
Well, you don't even know what the line is, but
doesn't matter. It could be 100. Fade it.
Okay. Not East Lansing. George Adams decides that the way to usher in the second coming, and this is on the heels of the Civil War. So this is in 1865. Look, the Civil War was a great time for apocalypticists.
Oh yeah, of course.
I mean, look, in Latter-day Saint tradition, we had a lot of people who, looked at it's hard to really describe just how much society was thrown into an uproar by the Civil War. I mean, the carnage is incredible. And you have states and economies that are completely destroyed by it. And look, there are more people who are casualties at the Battle of Antietam in one day than there are casualties for the entirety of the War of 1812, which is 3 years. So think about that for a minute. everything, we're talking about Fort McHenry and the British, burning Washington and all the battles going on.
You brought it right back to the tour, didn't you?
Nope.
Because we are going.
We are going to Fort McHenry.
Way to sell that.
We could have done, the Battle of New Orleans site.
Yeah, sure, but you didn't. You mentioned where we're going on our tour.
The reason why I didn't is because there was only like 6 Americans who got killed in that battle. Like we roasted the British.
I have been there with Garrett actually, and you geeked out.
It was pretty exciting.
It was fantastic.
Yeah. What was funny is that we were in the visitor center, and so my friends who were with me were asking me questions about the battle. It wasn't like there was a tour guide there.
No, but then people started to gather. It was hilarious,
and they started asking questions and stuff. And
the ranger comes over. He starts asking questions.
The ranger comes over. What was really funny though is one of the people who came up and were kind of like asking us a bunch of questions ended up being Latter-day Saints. Now, I don't know if you know Louisiana's demographics. Do we have any listeners in Louisiana?
Most of our listeners in Louisiana. We are blowing up.
In like Baton Rouge?
Baton Rouge, we're killing it. In most of the swamps near Lafayette, Monroe. Monroe, we're huge in Monroe.
Yeah, we've got
East Monroe. Oh my gosh!
I'm guessing we don't even have a single listen. You know what?
West Monroe.
If you happen to listen to us
Northeast
in Louisiana,
Monroe?
And I don't mean like you had a layover in Louisiana. If you're from Louisiana, we found out we had some listeners from Arkansas.
Yeah, we did actually. That was tremendous.
Yeah.
So, we're sorry for your loss.
Do you think that they came and cheered for BYU?
They probably had one of those shirts that's like split in half. One's blue.
My
one's
guess
red.
is actually that would cause them problems at home.
For sure.
Yeah. No. You just go. You root for Arkansas.
And we're big fans of Tulane. It's a great institution. The more that we can prop up.
I think my former stake president got his master's degree at Tulane.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's
so there are Mormons there.
Well, there were.
Well, before Katrina.
We've also been there and are no longer there.
It's true. But if you are a listener in Louisiana, we need to have you.
We want your beignet recipe, and we want.
That's funny. Well, so what I was talking about with all of this?
Yeah, what are you talking?
Is that the Civil War led to a huge rise in apocalypticism. We could do a 15-part podcast on that, because the casualties in the Civil War were so high, and so many people were affected by it. It's not just people in the South who have armies trudging through destroying their economy up and down, but it's also in various ways where people are moving away to join the army, even if they don't get killed. People are dying, being wounded. There is a huge rise in prosthetic limbs and fake wooden legs and hooks after the American Civil War, because one of the primary ways that you were treated by a battlefield surgeon is, oh, you were shot in the elbow? Let's just saw that off and then it won't become gangrenous. Huh?
Yeah, nice.
You know
nice
what?
Callback.
There's a lot of callbacks today. I feel like this is one giant callback. But to give you an idea of just how, I mean, we talked about this many moons ago, a long time ago on the podcast, we talked about Joseph Smith's revelation on the coming of the Civil War, Doctrine and Covenants, section 87. Do you remember that? Yeah. And when we talked about it, one of the things we said was that part of the aspect that's miraculous is that Joseph receives this revelation that the war is going to be terrible and long and bloody. And even up to the time that the Civil War breaks out, no one thinks that. And so you take the casualty figures of something like the American Civil War, and you factor that in as a percentage of the population. This is what you end up with. So in 1860, before the American Civil War begins, before the Succession Crisis, the war actually starts in 1861. There are roughly 31 or so million Americans living in all of the United States. During the Civil War, there's 650,000 casualties. Now, look, not all of those are deaths. Some of those are wounds, but Civil War wounds don't work out so well as we understand.
You mean like a tooth abscess?
Yeah, I mean like, hey, do you have hay fever? Not anymore because I'm dead. Do you know what that works out to? A roughly 2% of the entire population of the United States became casualties in the Civil War.
Wow.
If you were to do the same thing today, to give you an idea of what that would mean today,
It's got to be
7 million, almost 7 million casualties. How long were we in Afghanistan and Iraq? I mean, we got to where we were upwards of 5, 6, 7,000 casualties. 7 million is the equivalent of what the Civil War was. 2% of their population casualties in the Civil War. To give you a comparison to that, Richard, what are the casualty figures from the War of 1812?
Well, we got our unpaid intern crack research staff on top of this. So we
should hire JT.
we should.
He's going to be way better with numbers than we are.
100%.
Certainly better at lines.
13, that puts us right in the unpaid intern spot, I believe.
Yeah, I think, at what point do we have to obey child labor laws?
Well, we'll have a remote area in countries that don't observe those.
Okay, yeah. So
we'll
be getting our affiliate in Dubai quickly.
So between 25,000 and 70,000 American patriots died during active military service.
In the Revolutionary War.
Yes, the Revolutionary War. About 7,000, little under 7,000 were killed in battle, while 17,000 died of disease and lots of other things. The British casualty number was about 24,000 men that died.
So look at that for the Revolutionary War, which is 8 years long. I mean, frankly, it's early 1775, and they don't sign the Treaty of Paris, which is another Treaty of Paris. There's lots of treaties of Paris. If you want to talk more about treaties of Paris,
50-50 shot. What treaty is it? Treaty of Paris.
If you're guessing, it's either Paris or Ghent. Those are the ones you guess on. Just because if it's an American history test, Treaty of Ghent. Guadalupe Hidalgo, not so much.
No.
Only say that one if it's the Mexican-American War.
Yes.
But anyway, in the Battle of Antietam.
So War of 1812, you also asked.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. War of 1812. I forgot that you've done more research.
Look, I spent a lot of time doing a lot of research.
I feel like we are just blowing right past this.
Roughly 15,000 Americans died as a result of War of 1812. 8,600 British and Canadian soldiers.
And that war
died of battle and disease.
3 years long. At the Battle of Antietam, which was one day, it's in 1862. McClellan is trying to repel Lee's invasion of the North for the first time. And outside of Sharpsburg, Maryland, you always know a Confederate named battle because Confederates named their battles by the closest town. And the Union tend to name their battles by the closest body of water or physical feature, right? So, what does the Battle of Bull Run is called Bull Run by the Union because Bull Run is the name of the creek running through that area of Virginia. It's called the Battle of Manassas Junction by the Confederates because it's at Manassas Junction, right? So at any rate, the Battle of Antietam, Battle of Sharpsburg, same thing. 23,000 casualties in one day. So you can see how quickly that becomes apocalyptic, right? These are casualty rates that are not just horrific, which they of course are. They are totally unprecedented in American history. Washington is going to fight and win and lose huge battles with the British where they have 1,000 casualties on each side. Here you're having 12 and 13 and 14,000 people in a single battle. So one of the results of how horrific the Civil War became was a rise in a belief of millennialism and apocalypticism. And Adams is going to feed off of this. Clearly, we must be in the end times. If the most Christian nation on earth is rent into and millions of people are going to die. I mean, people don't know how long it's going to go. In the end, there's not going to be millions who die, but 650,000 casualties is a lot of casualties. And his church, Church of the Messiah, starts to gain quite a few congregants. Where do they believe they need to go to prepare for the second coming? Well, they believe they need to go to the Holy Land. So Adams is going to take a trip to the Holy Land, negotiate the purchase of some land outside of Jaffa. And from the Ottoman Empire controls all of that land. They controlled it all when Orson Hyde went. Interestingly, I said, I think on the previous podcast, that George Adams was very intrigued by Orson Hyde's trip to the Holy Land, even back in 1842 when he's talking about it. So he argues that a group of these believers need to go to the Holy Land in preparation for Jesus coming. So these members of the Church of the Messiah do exactly that. They actually buy land from the Ottoman Empire. Now, it ends up being terrible land. And 156 people who are his congregants go with him to go colonize this area in Jaffa. And they are, they are very ill prepared, to say the least. They essentially are there. They're there camped on the beaches, basically. They are living off of the kindness of the local settlers. They're ill prepared for it. But this is not just, the reason why I heard about it before was this is not just him doing it on his own. Adams actually gets an audience with big leaders in the United States government, including President Andrew Johnson, who becomes president after Abraham Lincoln is murdered. So Johnson and Seward actually help organize relations with the Ottoman Empire to get this American colony to move into Jaffa. Well, they buy a 10-acre plot of land. Okay, that's not very big for 156 people.
Hold on. Now, in our family tradition, 10 acres is...
it's 10 times what
that's
you
what
guys
I'm saying in Quebec.
But there weren't 156 Ledukes living on it. Or were there?
I feel like that's pretty close.
We by chance ran into another college athlete. We were looking at names who had the last name of Leduc. And I asked Richard, are you related to this one? And he essentially said we couldn't possibly be because he's an athlete.
Yes. Does he have a deviated septum? Does he have problems breathing in the spring or fall? No, then of course we're not related.
Okay. Well, there you go. Could be from the other side,
Sure.
The French side that didn't come to Canada.
Yes.
At any rate, 10 acres for 156 people when you are primarily agrarian economy makes it pretty rough. They found this colony. And very quickly there are problems, in part because these colonists had turned all their money over to Adams. Well, Adams is the one who's deciding how that money is going to be spent. This becomes a huge international incident because these people basically have nothing and they end up just starving. And the United States government, so again, why do I know American foreign relations? The United States government actually has to get involved to help pay to bring these American citizens back from their failed Church of the Messiah colony in Israel, in the Ottoman Empire, in what would later become part of Israel, or what anciently was part of Israel. I mean, there's so many ways that you could really put that up, ends up spending thousands of dollars bringing these people back. So, by 1867, the whole colony's collapsing. So that's the end of the story with George Adams, that he actually goes on to found this kind of Mormon-ish colony they still use things like the Book of Mormon, talking about the apocalyptic return of Jesus. They cause a giant nightmare with the U.S. State Department, who, it's their own fault. Andrew Johnson, probably thinking he could leverage it, agreed to let them go. But then the United States government ends up having to pay to bring all of these failed colonists back because they were all essentially starving to death on the shores of the Mediterranean. Now, that's probably not where you thought that story was going.
No. And I think that has ruined episode to episode teases for us forever.
So we should never, ever tease
well,
episodes.
I was just saying, if we're teasing something and then...
So you're saying it wasn't a very good answer?
No, it was great. It's just, it was
unexpected. Do you know of any other apostate former members of the Council of 50 who started a colony in what would later become Israel?
I know 6.
Join us next time when we talk about the various 6 people. So what we will talk about on our next episode, though, is, should I even say?
No, yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
Because if we do, then
we're absolutely going to do it. Yeah, we're 100%.
We say that, but we're not going to.
400%. With the standard of truth guarantee, we're going to do it.
It's a stone cold.
It's a stone cold lock of the week.
Lead pipe lock.
Yeah, we're going to do it.
What's our over-under on actually doing it? Are we taking lines on ourselves yet?
Yeah, minus 110.
Aren't we like Pete Rose at this point? If
betting on our own team?
Yeah. I always bet on us to win, though.
Yeah, well, but so you don't always bet. Well, because we're going to lose those games.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's what he did. That's why he was
going to lose. Yeah. Well, one of the things we want to talk about is this is the month that is the anniversary of the Constitution, right? So September. And we want to talk a little bit about Joseph Smith's feelings and his ideas surrounding the Constitution of the United States. And you often hear a lot of things surrounding this. And so I want to try to put some of these things in context to talk about what it was like for Joseph, because Joseph has multiple statements where he clearly reveres the Constitution. Joseph's very proud to be an American. I mean, Lee Greenwood's got nothing on him. He clearly treasures the fact that he is part of the American nation. And of course, he has actual Minutemen in his family history. His great grandfather and grandfather are people who served at various times in Revolutionary War capacities. And so it's not a theoretical thing for the Smiths that they, fought the British and that they secured these rights. It's part of their family history. Now I want you to think about how do you deal with the cognitive dissonance? Oh, there we go. How about that? Yeah. Of believing that the United States is a chosen place selected by God, that God has somehow allowed to defeat the mighty British Empire, and instead of becoming a democracy that collapses on itself, becomes a functioning democracy. To believe that, and then to have that same government utterly refuse to protect Latter-day Saints in their rights, their privileges, and their religion. How do you negotiate those things, knowing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence to be inspired by God, and yet to have your own enemies quoting the Constitution to you as they refuse to help protect your other rights outlined in the Constitution? So I think we want to do a little bit of an examination on that. And so for our next podcast, that's what we will spend some time on. Obviously, we'll read a few other emails. I'm sure Richard's antlers have offended other people at this point.
And I have actually now sent the email to JT while you were
talking.
So
the email was sent. So how much money are we out from the premium content now?
Well,
I mean, we were getting zero.
We're getting zero. So 0 minus 0, it all works out. When you factor in the cost of goods sold, and I've been doing some cost accounting here. Actually, we made quite a bit of money. What about inflation, though? Well, inflation hurts us, obviously.
Yeah, because we haven't raised our rates.
We should,
because you actually have to have customers.
Yeah, it's true. But if we raise our rates to the number I want, we just need one customer.
Right.
We need one.
We need a millionaire to donate.
Yeah.
Okay. No,
Billionaire.
Wow. Whoa. Wow.
Well, I mean, a millionaire. I mean, we appreciate all millionaire listeners, but we need someone that's a bit of a heavier hitter than that. If we're gonna,
what are our costs?
they're exorbitant, Garrett.
I feel like if we were to get that donation, I would see you driving like a Maserati the next day. Richard also does our books.
I do some creative cost accounting.
Yeah.
But,
well, I mean, you are the business PhD almost.
That's right.
So,
Almost.
so anyway, hopefully you learned a little bit about George Adams. We're going to talk a little bit about some of these other aspects of church history. And next time we're going to talk about this complicated relationship that Joseph Smith and frankly, going forward, Latter-day Saints are going to have with the institutions of American government and the founding documents of the United States, where they are both treasured and also problematic for a persecuted religious minority group. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Standard of Truth podcast, hosted by historian Dr. Garrett Dirkmaat. If you know anybody that could benefit from the material in this episode, please share it with them. And for more resources, visit standardoftruth.com. Until next time.